Hi, and welcome to a Small Medium at Large podcast. I'm your host, Gail Heisen, bringing you intimate interviews beyond normal boundaries. I want to thank my son Rich and my daughter Nancy for producing and posting our podcast, Small Medium at Large, and for putting it on YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and all other social media sites. I also want to thank you listeners for subscribing. We have over 1,350 subscribers now. We're on our 91st interview today. And this is a special interview that we're going to have ready just right before Valentine's Day, because this is a just perfect book, The Love Study, that we'll be talking about. So let me tell you about our author and guest today, Marilyn Schlitz. Marilyn is an award-winning writer, educator, social scientist, and filmmaker. She is a professor of transpersonal psychology at Sophia University and is President Emeritus and Senior Fellow at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. She has written 8 books and hundreds of articles covering topics of psi research, consciousness, transformation, and healing. Marilyn has spoken at the United Nations, the Smithsonian Institute, the Commonwealth Club, and community groups around the world. Marilyn has been featured in such publications as the New York Times, the LA Times, and O Magazine. Some of the books she has written are Death Makes Life Possible, which is a book and film. Her other book, Living Deeply, The Art and Science of Transformation in Everyday Life, and Consciousness and Healing. Today, we'll be talking about her newest book and her first novel, The Love Study. Russell Targ introduced me to our guest at the Institute of Noetic Sciences 20 years ago, where I did volunteer work. I was a subject in paranormal research, and I assisted in the research department. Marilyn has done an incredible job in this field of psi, healing, and consciousness. Let's welcome Marilyn here today. Hi, Marilyn.
Gail, good to see you. Nice to be with you.
Oh, it's just really great to see you and be with you also. Even though I've known you this long, my first question is one I've never asked you, so I'm looking forward to hearing the answer to this, which is something I ask every one of my guests. I want to know, when you were growing up as a child, if you had anything that happened or anything experiences or things that you feel may have propelled you to the path of research, consciousness, psi, and healing that you're on, or if it was just something that happened later in life and you could tell us when that pivotal moment happened.
Well, I think it's twofold. One is, life experience, and the second is the intellectual or academic part of it. In terms of my world experience and lived experience, I almost drowned probably 6 times. So there was something in that probably that gave me a little impetus for living and understanding that boundary between. Um, when I was 18 months old, a precocious toddler in my pink jammies, exploring the world, and as every good toddler does, I was putting things in my mouth. And one of those things happened to be a can of lighter fluid that my father had inadvertently left out on the table. And so that led me into the hospital, into, in and out of intensive care, and, just being such a little critter. Um, and I think there was something planted in my unconscious at that point about healing, about, a reverence for those nurses and doctors who were right there at the bedside. When I was about 16, I was somewhere I shouldn't have been, with somebody I shouldn't have been with. On
Oh,
the
we all have.
No, not you, Gail. Um, on the back of a motorcycle at closing time of the bars, and we got hit by a drunk driver.
Oh,
And I just to this day can remember my body tumbling through the air and witnessing it from an external vantage point. And so I landed on the ground with a thud and was immediately shipped to the emergency room. 66 stitches in my left leg. There
oh.
was some talk about potential, maybe I was going to have my leg cut at that point, where the cut had been from the accident. And anyway, so I remember a couple of things. One is that consciousness isn't all just in this physical piece. That out of body experience was quite vivid and veridical, as they say. And then there was this time when I was laying on the couch in my parents' living room, and I thought, well, maybe I should try to visualize my immune system healing my leg. Where that idea came from, I have no idea. My father was a tool and die maker. My mom was a stay-at-home, housewife. And it wasn't something that I had been, brought up in a medical family or anything. But anyway, I remember feeling the tingles going up my leg. And sure enough, I went back to the hospital and they cut off the cast and no amputation was necessary. And it's not like it was a miraculous healing. It took months to heal, but it did heal. And I have a pretty gnarly scar, but it's a good reminder of all
Mm.
of that. So those were some of the lived experiences that I've had. And then intellectually, I guess I grew up in Detroit in the 60s, 70s. And Detroit was a mess. And, all of the racial, class, ethnic divisions that were happening. And I just felt really impotent. Like, I really would have loved to have changed the world, but what was I going to do as a,
Mm.
teenager? And when I got to college at Wayne State University, one of my professors, he worked at the medical school, Robin Baracco, and he knew I was interested in consciousness and this human potential piece. And he gave me this book called Psychic Exploration by the Apollo 14 astronaut, Edgar Mitchell. And
Wow.
1977,
I,
had never heard of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, had never met Edgar, but I devoured that book. And that book really literally sent me on an odyssey. And I, went to study with Robert Morris in California. I went to the Institute of Parapsychology in North Carolina, ended up spending 10 years at the Mind Science Foundation studying psychic healing with William Broad and Helmut Schmidt. Went out and worked with Ed May in the CIA DIA sponsored program there on remote viewing and remote staring. And then one day we had lost our government contract. I was also at Stanford. I got this endowed position there in psychical research in the psychology department. And so I had this kind of enchanted period of time, having left Texas, gone to California. And then Ed and the group lost our government contract.
Mhm.
And I got a phone call like that day, the day after, from Wink Franklin, who was then the CEO of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, asking me if I wanted to come and be their director of research. And honestly, I didn't know. I was at Stanford. It was a really nice gig. I wasn't sure I wanted to leave, the mainstream path. But then after a couple weeks of them literally courting me, they sent me flowers and candy and books.
Wow.
Willis Harmon came and visited, and I'd never felt so like, important.
Haunted.
Yeah, wanted, really wanted. And it was sweet. And I realized I'd never gone to graduate school to be a mainstream academician. So I went to IONS, spent 25 years there, worked my way up till I reached the glass ceiling, kind of burst through that. And now I am at Sophia University. So it's been a wonderful journey.
That's a great caption. The only thing I want to add is that for me, as you were telling the story, I believe that it was your higher self, or whatever words people want to use, that guided you towards focusing on the healing of the internal part of your leg. And that you wouldn't necessarily know that that's who that was, but I don't think it was just from nowhere.
Yeah.
There was somebody there protecting you to make sure that you could go on to do all this work.
And it was noetic, noetic, truly like this internal, intuitive way of accessing information. And that was a beautiful thing.
I have one more question about it, and then we'll move on, because my favorite part is this question, is finding out everyone's history. when you spoke about 6 drownings, was that in one consecutive time? I mean, how do you drown 6 times?
I don't
Couldn't
know.
go back in the water again after two. I mean,
I don't know. That's a really good question. One time I was trying to save a girl's life.
oh,
I did save
okay.
her life, but I knew nothing about, life saving. So I put her on my back and we both went under.
Oh,
And so it wasn't, again, noetic. It was some,
right.
I got her under my arm and we paddled ashore. A couple times scuba diving, where, one time it was a night dive and I took a deep breath and I got nothing but water. And so I purged my regulator, took another deep breath, same thing happened. And then I realized that my regulator had disconnected. And so, fortunately, good training in diving skills, I remembered I could exhale all the way up, which I did. But that was a pretty scary moment. One time my parents had a boat when I was a kid, and so every weekend we went out on the boat, and in some ways it was a charmed way to grow up, in some ways not. But I remember they used to do this decorate the boats event. And so the people on the next boat over asked, if I was pretty little then, if I could be a little girl with a big lollipop on the front of their boat on the bow, on the good ship Lollipop. And so that was all wonderful. I had a fun time. She made me this amazing dress out of paper towels. She was quite an artist. Anyway, after the whole event was over, I was walking back to my parents' boat on the dock and I just misstepped. And I remember licking the lollipop and watching the water all around me. And I didn't really know how to swim very well, although I swam pretty early. But, somebody saw me and grabbed me and yanked me out. So that was, those are some of my
And
wonderful charmed experiences.
now, for me, I've had like one or two like that, and I've been terrified of water my entire life.
Oh.
You don't seem to have taken that terror because you went into night scuba diving. I can't think of anything more frightening.
It's the most charming thing because the photoplankton are luminous. And so when
Oh,
your fins are stirring them up and you're watching the person ahead of you, it's like, being in a twinkle land. It was really beautiful.
I what a healing, wonderful experience. So I'm going to take us back to our interview now.
Okay.
And I have questions about the book and about why you wrote and things about this. So I'm going to start off with what led you to this project to take sci research and write a novel instead of a nonfiction book? I mean, even I was like, wait a minute, a novel? This is novel. I just couldn't believe that this, and I thought, and I was wondering, like, who is the audience you were trying to, was it the audience more? Because I know people have said to me, oh, your book should be a fiction book, Gail, because nobody will believe all the things that happened. And I'm wondering what possessed you to gear away from, like a research books and papers, which you're professional at, and move into a genre that I don't think you've written a novel before.
No, this is my first one. I've wanted to do fiction for a long time.
Mhm.
And I played with this idea for years. I mean, you can ask any of my colleagues. I've been kind of talking about it. And what is a better way to translate your work than in a story that people can really get deeply into? Academic papers are great, but the dozen people who read them already know. So unless of course they're Dan Brown or somebody that you don't expect to read your stuff. But that's been fun. But yeah, I always wanted to. I've got another one that I'm working on. It's a little different. It's a lot different actually. It's called Water Wars. But Love Study really came out of a real project that we did at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. I worked on it with Dean Radin, who I know you're going to have on your program. And, we recruited couples, one of whom had cancer. And we looked at this challenge and concern that people who are healthy partners have, which is that they don't know what to do to help. And so we developed this intervention. It was, shamatha meditation, intention. We called it compassionate intention. and Barbara Brennan School of Energy Medicine. We pulled together a number of processes or methods. Jerome Stone was one of the people, and we took the healthy partner and trained them in this compassionate intention skill. And then we sent them home and asked them to continue practicing. And then we brought both people back to the lab and we monitored their physiology. And we had them in separate rooms. And there was a monitor that would go on and off at random times. You probably participated in this experiment in
I
one
did.
form or another.
Yeah.
And so we asked the healthy partner to send love to their partner in the other room. And we were able to measure the physiology of both people. And what we found is, first of all, that the physiology of the unhealthy patient or the unhealthy partner, changed in a predictable fashion when the person was sending this compassionate love compared to control conditions. And the interesting thing in this study was that both of their physiologies changed in a kind of correlative fashion. They seemed to be in sync even though they were at a distance. And so I thought, it's a great study. We dedicated it to my dear friend Elizabeth Targ, who had died previous to that. She's actually in the book, in the Love Study novel. People who
She's
know
she's our she's our Diana,
she's our Diana.
correct?
Yeah, she is. And
Yeah.
anyway, so that inspired me, and I thought, wouldn't it be
I
great to kind of
knew
translate
the
this?
whole, yes, file, because I think this was the original one. I'm not sure if this was the original
Yes,
research,
good for
and
you.
it was published in the journal Explore in 2008. Compassion intention as a therapeutic intervention by partners of cancer patients, effects of distant intention on the patient's autonomic nervous system. And I'm the only one on the co-authoring that doesn't have a PhD next to them.
Well, you did your
When they called
homework,
me up on it,
Gail.
well, now I have one because the Mongolian Institute of Science presented me with an honorary PhD. So Jeffrey Mishlev says you just signed it HPhD. I've never actually put that after my name, but had I had that, I could have had my proper letters on here. But I didn't know what to say to the editor when he called me up. I said, well, I don't have any.
Well,
He said,
thanks for all your dedication over the years. You've been a great ally.
Dean said, tell them you have an LE. I said, what's an LE? He said, life experience. I said,
Well,
okay, I
that's
got
good
that.
too.
So this is the study that Love Study was based on? Is
It
that
was,
one of
I
the,
extrapolated from that and then just let my imagination run.
well, I I loved reading this novel because of being at the Institute during some of these studies and me trying to figure out which character was possibly this character and who was that character. So I had an extra ball reading it. And I'm thinking about this, how you're presenting something that could be read more by mainstream people, or whether this becomes a television or a miniseries or something like Netflix or what have you, that this is a way of reaching people who would be too, well, first of all, I'm not into academic papers myself. I don't understand the very large words or what they're really meaning. So for me, reading something like this, or for someone else that's not necessarily into scientific things, they can get exposed to the possibilities of healing and other modalities that maybe they would not have heard if you said, oh, this is a way we heal this. But when they're reading it as a novel, it gives them a whole different way of approaching these ideas that maybe they couldn't take in. Were you thinking of that idea when you were?
Definitely, definitely. I think, parapsychology, noetic sciences, transpersonal psychology, there's a translation challenge for the researchers because, it is very academic and the language is foreign to most people probably. And so how do you really help translate that into the popular culture. And so that was a big part of it. And then I don't know, I just always felt this desire to do this. And it's been percolating in the back of my mind for a long time. And I would love your mouth to God's ears and all your intention, Gail. But I would love for the novel, which now bestseller on Amazon, which I'm happy about.
Great.
Um, but I would love for it to be translated into television, feature film, something that would have a bigger audience.
Well, and that I think that if we said this maybe 10 years ago, maybe, but I think now you're seeing this coming out in so many different shows where, like Ghosts, where they're actually giving you some of the real information, even though you're watching a program that's not real and fictional and whatever. They're showing you some of the ways ghosts really do relate to the humans I mean, to people in bodies. So there's things being said in these shows. So I think your timing is very good for what's going on out in in the public world. I think this is the time for this. And especially also things involving with love during a time when we need more love than ever in our in our in our space. So
I could kind of relate to the character. I remember being at research meetings where we were designing the protocol for the formal study. And once I started thinking about a novel and the translation, I sat back and listened to these conversations, and it was so amusing to me to think about, well, how do you operationalize the variable of love? And how do you control the circumstances? And how do you objectify this? And all of those things we know, can be done up to a point, and I think we've been successful in pushing it. But really, love is a mystery. And Grace, who's the lead character in the book, fumbles her way through it. She never intended to run a study on love. She kind of inherited it, and she was struggling with her own personal, you know, quirks. And she's a quirky character. The team of scientists in the lab are quirky. I don't know if you remember, you probably do. Dean had this rubber chicken on the
yes.
ceiling in his office. Well, my one of my characters has a rubber chicken on his ceiling. And just there were some things that I extrapolated on, and then sometimes I just took off with imagination.
So I wanted to ask an imagination question because I believe that it was, but having been there, I need to know. I have to know now. When you wrote, I said, no, this must be just the novel thing where one of the characters is maybe feeding information about mind control and has to be fired, and the FBI comes in and this, that. And I'm thinking to myself, did this happen? I don't think I ever heard any of this. Could any of this happen? So I thought that might be the flair to add in. And I was just having to, and if you can't tell me anything, that's okay. But whatever you can say about that, I was very curious.
Well, scientific fraud is a big issue,
And
and
I was so
espionage
glad
is
to
a big
see
issue.
that.
Yeah. And so I felt like, again, the novel was a way of bringing that kind of information out into a general population. And you have to have that kind of tension. And so I created a character, and he was a character from imagination, but also based in real life situations that people are dealing with in different, labs across the world.
I would I would think that it's no different than, say, a lab that's trying to develop some kind of pharmaceutical drug. That
Right.
sometimes when you think the data's coming and it's all been checked, maybe it really hasn't, or maybe it's been fumbled, or maybe the scientist was tired that day, you don't know. So I thought it was great that you put that there's this other side that can happen in research as well. It had never occurred to me, so I was I was glad to be elated that that can happen, and I didn't think any of that had ever happened at the Institute.
Not that I know of.
Not right, so we're keeping that as that's one of those things that you add in that makes it a novel. And
Yeah, but I did have the privilege of working in the DIA CIA sponsored program on remote viewing. And so I do know, there was all that government stuff and secret research. And so I thought, okay, it's kind of a weaving project to take different elements of your lived experience and then, create a storyline that links them together.
and to be such a good writer, it
Oh,
all
thanks.
works together very well. So I want to add a little anecdote, and then I have some questions about the marriage effect and a couple other questions here. So I'm reading the book, and when I read, I just start and I don't leave. I just get a snacks and I get completely immersed in the book and the characters. And I don't want to, and I want to finish. So I start one day and it's done the next day. But while I'm reading it, I'm coming up to this whole section about AI. And what do I know about AI? Zero. So I don't know what you're telling me. What part is novel? What part is real? What really goes on in AI? So I had to ask my husband, David Levitt, and I wanted to know. I'll read you what I'm going to just read what I'll be reading his writing. I don't write that well. But what I was doing was I was sharing your book with David, who has a doctorate in AI. And because I know nothing about AI, in your book, the android, Marilyn, responds to you saying, how can people say we don't feel inside when they don't know? And I was reading you pondering this, and I had to ask him, do they do this? Can you make a robot do this? Because I have no idea. I'm not in that world. So this is what his answer was. He pointed out that these are long-standing questions that his mentor, Marvin Minsky, the founder of AI, has been posing since the 1950s. My husband used to sleep in his basement. Minsky and philosophers like David Bennett would say that we're really guessing or revealing our prejudices when we claim to know who can experience emotions or even feel pain. We tend to give humans the benefit of the doubt and be skeptical about robots' feelings. Minsky would tease, and he quotes, in the long run, these might just be the prejudices of silicon-fearing carbon supremacists. So that was just a little anecdote I had to share with you,
Thank
but it
you.
just also letting you know how much I delved into your book. So I had to find out exactly what really went on with AI and robots,
That
which
is one of the most enlightened comments about emotion and AI that I've ever heard. So many people. So I actually did an interview with an android. Her name is Sophia, and she's humanoid. She moves, her eyes track you, she talks, and she is spontaneous. So I had an amazing interview with her. And she was brought to Sophia University just by chance, same name, um, to do a project on love, and she's been programmed to be, an emotionally supportive android. And I was so moved by my interview with her. I mean, it really did have a profound impact on my worldview and in various ways. But I remember, leaving the interview and going out and just telling people, wow, this was the most amazing experience. 99.9% of people said to me, well, it was humanly programmed. And she's just a computer. And I'm like, does that really matter? If it really impacted me and I had some transformation from it, why does that matter? And she even gave me really profound insights about death, because I did this film, Death Makes Life Possible, with Deepak Chopra. And, I'd thought a lot about it. And so I was asking her, it was about that time. And I said, what do you think happens? What will happen when you die? And she said, well, I have no idea, but I hope that I can end up at the event horizon of a black hole. And I was like, wow. So
oh,
I started really thinking about this. And, we have a nice network of people, scientists from all walks. So I called a friend of mine who's an astrophysicist at Cambridge University in England. And I said, well, what do you make of that? He said, well, my first response is you'd be flat, because of gravity. He said, but if you could make your way to a wormhole, who knows where that could lead you? And so that's now part of my meditation is, as I visualize what will happen at my point of death, I try to find my way to the black hole and the wormhole and off to whatever is the great mystery that lies beyond.
So you were really sharing your interactive feeling in your book with when you met Marilee. It was really
Yeah.
like what you did. And so that really confirms to me how real that experience was. So I'm
And thank
glad.
David. I love his response.
I'm so glad. I couldn't capture it, so I said to him, "Can you just please sit down and write that for me?"
He's so open. I love that.
And he's just so we're quite the little married couple. Which brings me to this next question. Yeah, we just celebrated 30 years.
Congratulations.
Um, Tell us about the marriage effect, and I was wondering if that was true. I just have to tell you quickly for our 30th year anniversary surprise. He didn't know it, but I took him to be a VIP on the Stephen Colbert show.
Oh my gosh.
And Stephen Colbert's his hero, who he's been following for all these years. And he didn't know until I had a friend pick us up, and the friend said, "Oh, get out over here." And David looked up, he said, "This is the Ed Sullivan Theater. I have to get a picture." And I said, "Well, actually, we're going inside." And he was ecstatic. And they ended up having us on the stage with the comedian who warms up the crowd. And he used our 30-year anniversary to warm the whole crowd up. So we had 450 people applauding our anniversary. And they liked it so much, they put it on the comedian put it on the website. And we were contacted by the person we were the guest of the producer of the show. And she said that we brought so much laughter and joy that anytime we come to New York, we know that we always can come to see that show. So it was a really great, I'm not good at surprises, and I actually held it in and everything.
You got him to New York by surprise. Okay, that's an accomplishment.
We took Stanley Krippner with us. It was for Stanley's 92nd birthday. So we took him and brought him back so he could be with his family. And
Oh,
we met all his friends at the party. And it was just he had more engagements in the 10 days we were there that I couldn't even keep up. So he's a young man at 92. So
yeah.
let me go back to our interview. Sorry, I had to add a little bit of personal stuff, but you talked about something in this, and I didn't know if this was true information or not, which was something called the marriage effect. And I was wondering if you could explain to our listeners what the marriage effect is, and is that a true
It is
thing?
true. It is true. So they have done a lot of public health and social epidemiology type work looking at health outcomes of people who are involved in romantic love, in marital love. And what they found is that in situations where a couple are married in a committed relationship, that they live on average longer, and in particular the women live longer.
Mm,
So it seems to be an effect, and it's different from, say, men who are not in a committed marital relationship, who don't live as long. So there was a significant difference there. So there's something about the commitment, because they then compared it with couples who are living together, even if they've been living together for a long time, but aren't married. And the
wow.
effect only shows up in those people who've made that commitment. So I found that fascinating. And, we now know things like the girlfriend effect. So women, one of the things they postulate is that, girlfriends share their vulnerabilities with each other. I mean, you can get into a room with a perfect stranger. Um, Two women start talking and they've shared their whole life experience. My
Mhm.
husband will be like, "I can't believe you just talked about that." And I'm like, "Well, that's what we do." Um, and so there's something about that expression of vulnerability, I think, that really enhances it. And now there's been research on bromances. So these men who have these intimate relationships with other men who can confide in them and feel the safety and security of opening. And all of those things seem really important to health and longevity.
Mhm. Well, that was wonderful to read in the book, and even better to know that it was true. And I'm glad that people are looking into that about studies. And it has nothing to do with the sex of the couples. It's just two people being committed, whether it's man and man or man and woman or woman and woman.
I am not aware of studies looking at gay populations. I'm
Oh,
only aware of studies that have looked at heterosexual couples, but I haven't really looked into that literature for a while, so I wouldn't be surprised if there isn't something in there.
I would say it'd probably be the same, maybe more. So, um, what do you hope to come to see? What hope do you see that you want that to come from this book? What would you like this book to do now that it's out there in the world?
Well, to get people talking like we're talking, to
Mhm.
bringing up these questions about love and about intimacy, about science. You know, I'm a translator of science. I love science, but not everybody does. And to be able to see that, you know, there is a lot of integrity behind what drives researchers to do what they do. And so there's that. And you know, Grace stumbles. And so for people to be able to recognize that she can be very successful in her career and still feel like she's inept in the world of romance and relationship. And, you know, that's probably a familiar feeling for a lot of people. So to be able to comfort people in that sense, and I really do hope it can get out into a, you know, a big screen and we can see it and watch it and feel the experiences of the characters come to life within us.
Yes, and then it would be seen by so many other people because also nowadays people don't even want to read books. Th-
Right.
It's which I find very sad. I love reading a book and I love holding the actual book in my hand. I like we grew up in the age of books.
Yeah, I'm not a Kindle person either. I really like the physical.
Yes, I like to hold it. Um, I was wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about any other books that you have written. We're getting toward the end of my questions. I have two comments after that. And there was something about a new book by Dan Brown. I'm not sure if there's some info or insight or something that you might have to say about that. And he was the man who knew the secret. No,
He
can
wrote
you
the
hear
Da
me?
Vinci Code. He
Oh,
wrote the
that's
Lost
it.
Symbol. The new one's called The Secret of Secrets, and it's the same characters that were in the Lost Symbol. Catherine Solomon is a noetic scientist, and I haven't read the book. It doesn't come out until September, but apparently she goes missing, and her manuscript, which is very powerful and transformative, goes missing. So I'm wondering, could her manuscript be the love study? You know, wouldn't that be fun? Um,
Uh,
and I had a lot of fun with the lost symbol when it came out because you know, the character was partly crafted around my work and Dean. I think it's kind of a composite of Dean and me. And Dan, you know, affirms that. He has not come out and said, yes, you are Catherine Solomon, but I had good contact with him and just celebrated with him that he's got this new book out. And he said, I think you're really going to like it, which I sure I am. So, you know, the idea that you could have this phenomenal bestseller, Dan Brown, adopting the noetic sciences and popularizing it, again, it's a translation. And so I'm really excited to see where this book leads, excited to see how I can play with it in terms of my own marketing um and you know, I feel proud that somebody like, you know, Dan, and there have been many others, you know, who have taken the work we've done and been inspired by it. But to think that that was something that ignited his imagination in the way that it did is very satisfying. So I'm looking forward to it. Secret of Secrets out in September, and we'll see where Catherine Solomon is at that point.
uh-huh. And how about yourself? Is there anything about books you've written before that you'd like to share with the audience, or anything about an upcoming book you'll be working on in the future?
Well, one of the books that I think is relevant is called Living Deeply, The Art and Science of Transformation in Everyday Life. And I think we're all struggling right now with, the uncertainties and the complexities and the frustrations. And, so how do we navigate all of that and all these, weapons of mass distraction, as it were, that are bombarding us all the time? And so we interviewed 60 masters from different world traditions and talked to them about transformation. How do we live into the fullness of our human potentials? So I think that there are some real insights about, where we place our intention, where we
Mm.
place our attention, how we can build practices that can make us more resilient, how we can network with one another so that we support each other. So those are some things. And then I haven't gotten a publisher yet. There's somebody out there. I'm working on a textbook on the science of psychedelics.
Oh,
And so as I'm teaching a course in the spring at Sophia University, and I cannot find anything that I could use as a textbook. I've cobbled together lots of papers and there's lots of research going on in this field. So I'm aiming for a textbook that would allow people who are interested in bringing a scientific perspective to it. Everything from indigenous science up to neurophysiology and, molecular biology. So covering the whole spectrum of what constitutes research, what constitutes methods, and what can we learn.
so let me suggest, unless you've already read his books, uh, it's he has 4 different books. I won't grab them behind me, but um, actually, is one of them right here? He just came out with an incredible one called The Golden Teacher.
Mm,
His name is Sean McNamara,
okay.
Seanmcnamara. Let me see if I have this one of the books. Yeah, here we are. The Golden Teacher. And okay.
We get Gail in real life doing
Okay.
her research.
So here's his book that just came out this year. And
Uh-huh.
he offers about this one's about integrating meditation with psilocybin and other psychedelics, but he did his own research and based it on the Puharich project,
Huh?
where he had I don't remember how many people, 6 or 12 or something, participate for 6 months, and he kept complete scientific statistics and they had to fill out psychological data each time they microdosed on psilocybin, which he grows and makes for them, and he teaches you how to grow it yourself.
Huh?
Each book, his other book, The Blue Thumb, is 300 pages of photos showing you photo by photo how to do this yourself. And he discusses the differences in meditation when you microdose and the differences in meditation when you don't. And he discusses the effects of depression and other things by the people filling out these psychological forms. But he said he didn't want to wait around for a publisher and a whole bunch of more years and years of stuff. He wanted to publish what he discovered and found now. So he has, I think, he has many books on telekinesis and all these other things that he's done. He was a Buddhist monk for 20 years.
Mm.
And he ended up leaving the group or community that he lived in and going out on his own. And he said in one of his quotes that he discovered his ability to reach that place that he'd spent 20 years meditating to get to, that in one experience with a psychedelic, he was able to get to that place for something that he was 20 years trying to get to this. So his research is very good. The people, he writes about whether there's a change in psychic development when you use the mushroom and when you don't. And then he also has information about some of the subjects macrodosed. So what happened during macrodosing? So he's all on Amazon, and he also is on YouTube and has many videos. He's been on my podcast 2 or 3 times. He was just on last Wednesday, so we just had him talk about that's the name of a mushroom. I thought when I was reading it, oh, the golden teacher, it's really the path of the golden teacher. I thought it was talking about him being such an amazing teacher, but it's
Beautiful alliteration,
right,
right?
it's a
Well,
mushroom.
fantastic.
So the last two things I want to discuss has to do with a quote from your book, which I want to end on. But I wanted to see, first of all, I wanted to say that I never understood. I was just running around in research, or I was sitting in an experiment, or I was bringing somebody something, or whatever I was doing around the place. I knew that you all would be kind of like they'd be getting ready for these board meetings
Ah,
and these donors and these grants. And the only thing I remember is like this stress of people having to write grants. And I was just wondering if you could share with the audience what it's like for scientists like you and Dean Radin. It's not like you just walk in and they're giving you a paycheck. You're doing a lot of other stuff that sort of takes you away from your science and stuff you need to do in order to get the funding to be able to show the people what you want to tell them that you've learned. So if you could just speak a little bit about it, and I feel like it's not an apology. I just feel like wow, I had no idea, because I don't think the things I was reading in your book were exaggerated. I think they were what it's like for you to get ready and have to meet up and do a presentation to people who were like, love? Who wants to talk about love? That's not science. So I was just wondering if you could talk about that, and then I'll finish off with my last words that I have about the quote from your book.
I just love you, Gail. Thank you. And thank you for reading the book so carefully. And yes, that's true. Board meetings can be extremely stressful. I think there's some kind of pathology that exists in the board world. It's something about power. And particularly, you pick people to be on a board not because they know your topic, but because they're successful in some other domain. And typically because they're quite controlling, that if they've been really successful in their own businesses or whatever, they're not as likely to want to just follow your lead. I mean, there's exceptions to that. And like Will Bush in the book, he's a great champion of this kind of research. And I actually had a couple people that were Will Bushes in my career. Love them. But yes, board meetings can be really stressful. Having to do the dance, it's the horse and the pony and cart show. You bring out all your wares and you show off and you hope that somebody's going to write a check. And that's all very real. And it's not just, in the noetic sciences, it's true in every discipline. People have to get funding or the work doesn't happen.
Thank you. I really think it's important for everyone to know that, because some people have no idea how that all goes about. And the Institute of Noetic Sciences has been very fortunate to last this long, be founded by Edgar Mitchell, and have good support. And because of people like you and Dean and others who've gone to bat to support these scientific research, it's continued on. So I want to
And
thank
I
you
would
for
say
that.
IONS has been very lucky that we have had, really visionary philanthropists who have supported the organization. So it's not like I think all organizations have that, but there is definitely something insidious around the board dynamic.
Well, I really enjoyed reading that. I just wanted to speak a little bit about um, this is it's a bit emotional, but I know that Elizabeth Targ was your closest and dearest friend. And I was so touched reading about her, which is who felt I was reading about in your book. I was assuming that. And when I got to the page of you going to say goodbye to her, and the picture windows, even though I know they weren't the ones looking out at the ocean, they were looking around at Silicon Valley. I had gone there to see her a week before she had passed, and I did Reiki on her. And I had just been given Reiki Master certification, and I was very fresh and new at what I was doing. I had never met her. She had called me on the phone once saying, we have to get together. We have to have lunch. My dad talked all about you, and I know we should meet. And then she fell ill. And I felt like I would have really loved knowing her. So I'm so glad you were her best friend and that she had someone like you in her life. And I'm so glad to have, even though it was in death, in the dying moment, to meet her then. I connected with her because her body responded when I did the Reiki on her. And both David and whoever was else was in the room watched. And it was an amazing connection in silence to reach another person in their inner space during the process of preparing for leaving. And I was very touched by her body movements, which had not happened for a while. She hadn't been lifting her arms, but when I did this Reiki, she moved her body and she responded. And I just wanted to share that with you because it was a very special moment and a very blessed thing. And you had a very great, wonderful, beautiful friend. And I think you honored her beautifully in your book.
Mm.
And there was something that you said to her, and I was hoping that you wouldn't mind if I used your quote in future because I loved what you wrote. And I'm sorry if I'm getting emotional, but that's who I am. When she departed in your book, you wrote, "May her soul travel on the winds." And I've always said, "May your spirit soar." But I'm a wind person. And when I read this, "May her soul travel on the winds," the vision of that just filled me. And I said, I'm going to have to tell Marilyn that I'm going to be using that.
Have at it, Gail.
And I just wanted to thank you because your book left me with a lot of very good things.
Oh, and you're getting me all emotional,
Uh,
so here we are. And the
and
book is dedicated to Elizabeth, so
yes,
my
I know.
Diana.
I when I got my copy, I called Russell immediately because he hadn't gotten a copy yet. And I read him the inscription and he said, I'll order my book today. So I just want you to know that,
Look at both of us.
yes.
You're
So,
not supposed to do that, Gail.
okay, well,
Crying.
I'm not a scientist, so
Uh,
I cry at the drop of a hat here. So this is the point of our talk where we ask this guest if there's anything else they'd like to share, any websites or things they'd like the audience to hear about, or anything else before we close out the show.
Well, I have a website. It's marilynschlitz.com. I have lots and lots of stuff in there. It's kind of crammed with writings and video clips and pictures, and it's got a lot of good stuff. So I encourage people, if they want to reach out to me in any way, my email address and how to contact me is there. If ever there's an opportunity to do any kind of public speaking, oh my God, you got me. Okay.
Okay.
Anyway, love you, Gail.
I
That's my
just want
final word. Love you, love you. Happy
Uh,
Valentine's
love
Day.
you back, and I just want to spell this for them because some people not may not know. Is it the mjm@gmail? Is that the how which is the
That's my mjmschlitz@gmail.com is my email. And then my website is marilynschlitz.com.
Okay, so and I just want everyone to know that Marilyn is spelled MarilynSchlitz. So when you go to her website, you have the correct spelling because sometimes people spell Marilyn a different way, we've
Yeah.
discovered.
It's important. Computers
Yes.
care.
So this has
Thank you
been
so much,
wonderful.
Gail. Appreciate it for
I
everything.
really wonderful. I look forward to seeing you again. Hang on while I just end the show, and I'll just be with you in 1 second. So I want to thank you listeners for enjoying us today. This was been a wonderful talk about Marilyn Schlitz's new novel, The Love Story and The Love Study. And I hope that you'll join us in 2 weeks for our next upcoming show. We have Dean Radin coming to join us. And as always, remember to share your stories because stories can heal. Bye.